Future Warrior, Dawn of the Daimos. Chapter 9. Stalker felt a burning hatred rise inside him at the sight of the red-colored transports. A bitter taste filling the back of his throat as the ships dropped out of sight close to the Daimos vessel. Stalker ran the facts through his mind in rapid-fire order and tried to assimilate the obvious implications of their presence on the planet. It was true that the Red Legion had not been totally eliminated during the battles on Mars. The Twisted Cult had long before spread to Earth and the outer colonies prior to the outbreak of the Martian insurrection. Once the insurrection had begun, the cult had been officially outlawed, and members were hunted down ruthlessly and eliminated wherever they were found. Stalker felt slightly colder at the memories. He had been assigned to several missions himself in the 12 months after he had returned from Mars. It wasn't something he liked to remember. He had not even told Zoe about those dark days. It was the one time he had lied to her, telling her he was on training exercises to help rebuild the Terra Nova. He regretted lying to her, and something in her eyes told him that she knew. Maybe she did, but knew better than to ask, or didn't want to hear him lie again. It was the one part of his service to Earth about which he felt a level of shame, both because of the oaths he had taken and the things that he had done. Could you ever justify murder? It was a question he has asked himself numerous times. It was murder he knew, despite the willingness that he felt to treat the Reds like the rabid dogs they were. They were at least still human. Stalker recalled the first mission that he had been charged with executing under the direct orders of Alpha One himself. The snow had been knee-deep and slowed him and the others as they waded through it in the dark. The world to them lit like green daylight by their EEA's enhanced vision. They had approached the cabin in the remote woods on two sides, creating the classic L-shaped formation with its lethal crossfire and dedicated kill zone. He had approached the building himself and carefully peered in the window at the unsuspecting people inside. There had been at least a dozen of them. They had all been young, in their early to mid-20s, both men and women. They had been sitting around a long wooden table in the center of the room, or standing by a fire, holding glasses of wine. They had looked like normal people, and could have been any group of friends enjoying the beauty of the mountains and each other's company. But they weren't. They were members of sleeper cells of Red Legion fanatics who had congregated for a meeting to discuss the future plans of a movement in hiding. As he had watched them laugh and joke, he had known that they would all be dead in a few minutes, their expensive clothes and the cabins polished with floors covered with blood. No trial, no jury, just judgment delivered at his hands, their fates decided by others he didn't know and would never meet. He had felt nothing for the men and women in the cabin. They had been the enemy, merely a target to be eliminated. He had felt more like an instrument, more machine than man, the blood washing easily from his armor. Much later, he had wondered if whatever god or gods waited at the end of his days would understand and forgive him for what he had done in that place and the many others. The stains were long gone from his body, but seemed to remain on his soul. Stalker left his memories and refocused on the present. The Red Legion had been driven to the point of extinction, or so he had thought, and yet here they were as large as life. He had to find out what was going on, and that meant getting closer, a lot closer. Stalker decided to move straight away. There was no telling how long the Reds would remain in place, and he wanted to know what they were up to. Quickly, Stalker slung his ASBR across his back and broke off a couple of bushy branches from the surrounding shrubs. Holding one in each hand in front of him, he crawled out from his hide and began to crawl down the slope towards a thick stand of trees. Despite the fear and his racing heartbeat, Stalker struggled to keep himself from laughing at how absurd he must have looked, crawling in the dust hiding behind two branches. But despite the humor, he knew that from a distance the branches would break up his dark shape against the lighter-colored ground, making him harder to spot. The few minutes that it took to crawl to the tree line thankfully passed without incident, and he tossed the branches aside and, rifle leading the way and keeping low, he moved towards the settlement. Atlas peered out of one of the transport's viewports. After days of delicate negotiations conducted at arm's length, they had finally been able to agree on a meeting point, a world just conquered by the Daimos. The message behind the decision was clear. The meeting would be on Deimos terms and held in full sight of their not inconsiderable power. The air in the transport was stale after the days spent in the confined space, but they had been denied permission to leave, or indeed, even to open a door. Atlas had to admit, even he had been surprised by the mixture of skill, caution, and arrogance that formed Deimos negotiating. They had delayed the meeting until they were in a position of strength, a position reinforced by keeping the Red Legion negotiating team waiting on board their transport. There was to be no doubt who was in charge of the meeting and of the fates of these attending. Once they had landed, Deimos warriors had formed up covering positions around the transport, yet another overt show of strength. Atlas had seen Deimos remains years before, and based on biomodeling had known what to expect, but seeing the first of the Deimos in the flesh as they surrounded the transport had been an unsettling experience. Atlas wiped a thin sheen of sweat from his brow. The Deimos had insisted that all systems and power sources on board the transport be shut down immediately after landing. That had included the climate control systems. Atlas coughed. Days of talking in the deep Deimos tongue that felt strange to a human throat had left this voice beginning to fail, the hot, humid interior not helping. The heavy red, colored robes he had been forced to wear for the meeting did little to improve the situation, and not for the first time since landing, Atlas found himself wishing they would get on with it. From the edge of the trees, Stalker lay and scrutinized the settlement carefully. Nothing moved in or around the buildings that he could see. He wished his EEA suit was still operational. The suit sensors could have detected any hidden threats or infrared beams that were invisible to the naked eye. Stalker ground his teeth slightly. You work with what you have at the time, not what you wished you had, he recited, remembering his training. With his rifle at his shoulder, he rose slowly and took a step forward. The buildings remained silent. Moving as quickly and quietly as possible, Stalker moved across the open space to the side of the first building and froze, every sense straining but finding nothing out of place. Stalker moved around and peered inside a window. The building was deserted. Stalker moved past several more buildings, carefully checking corners and windows as he passed. Some of the buildings had open doors, and items could be seen scattered about on the floors inside. The settlement reminded him of the colony on Pavonis Prime, although it lacked the signs of chaos that he had seen there. Stalker hoped that it was a sign that the population had been successfully evacuated before the Deimos had arrived. Stalker slipped into an open doorway of a two-story building and, carefully stepping over discarded items, made his way upstairs, and reaching a second-story window, peered carefully outside. A wall of steel seemed to rise into the heavens and block out the sunlight. The massive height of the Deimos ship casting its baleful shadow over the small settlement. From his vantage point, Stalker finally had a good view of what was going on in and around the behemoth. Between the ship and the buildings, the trees had been felled, and Stalker could clearly see that the hull of the alien ship bore the unmistakable scars of combat, the dirty brown metal rent with numerous dark gashes. The area around the wounds was a hive of activity. Frames had been built that formed a lattice around the holes, and from them cascades of sparks were falling, and the bright flashes of laser cutters were continuous as the damage was patched up with feverish speed. This wasn't what caught Stalker's attention, however. In the cleared area between the ship and settlement were two red-painted transport ships, both of the same civilian medium-range type. Stalker recognized the type and knew instantly that they possessed a faster-than-light capability. An idea quickly formed in his mind, a crazy idea, but perhaps just crazy enough to work. A sly grin formed on Stalker's face, like a wolf who had spied a limping deer. What nice shuttles you have. Between the building he was concealed in and the transport, Stalker could see Deimos. Several were manning a pair of heavy weapons which were trained on the red transports. Others were walking in groups with their eerily graceful gait, their short, stubby weapons slung over their backs and long twin-bladed knives sheathed at their sides. A few wandered towards the settlement, close enough for Stalker to hear their guttural voices as they passed. An hour elapsed before Stalker saw any sign of the occupants of the transports. A group of Deimos emerged from an opening on the alien vessel and headed for the Red Legion transports. Amongst them was Solitary Human. He was dressed in a sweeping red robe bearing the Red Legion glyph, and despite the fierce tall aliens that flanked him, his face was the picture of serene calmness. When the group reached the transport, the man called something out that Stalker couldn't hear, and the transport's rear door opened, several more people emerging. These men were wearing standard battle armor, which had been dyed red, but carried no weapons. The two groups faced off, with the robed man in between them, gesturing to both sides. It took Stalker a moment to realize what was happening. He was seeing the first meeting between the Red Legion and the Deimos. Stalker cursed that he was too far away to hear what was being said, and instead watched intently, trying to grasp what was being said by body language. Both groups were visibly tense. The Deimos cradled their weapons seemingly casually, but Stalker knew that they could bring them to bear with frightening speed. Some of the Reds looked decidedly uncomfortable, while a few of the others, clearly high-ranking, stood a little easier. Stalker quickly realized that the robed man was translating for the two groups, passing messages back and forth. Atlas realized the negotiations were in trouble from the start. The Deimos were confident in their own abilities and were clearly wary of making any agreements with a faction of a race they had come to conquer, and about whom they know little. Atlas knew there was a danger that the Deimos would find it easier to ignore the proposal altogether and kill them all where they stood, and the discussion was fast reaching a crucial point. The lead Deimos negotiator growled deeply, demanding what possible use the Deimos could have for the Red Legion, pointing to the lead Red Legion delegate and suggesting that his head would make a fine trophy. Atlas recognized the attempt at intimidation, a test of strength the Red Legion negotiators could not afford to fail. There will be fine trophies aplenty on Earth, Lord. Many will refuse to recognize your superiority, and they will fight to the end. The battle to come will cost you many lives and resources, at the end of which you could possess either a conquered planet with a hostile population or an ally. The true meaning of victory is not merely to conquer, but to force your opponent to accept that they were wrong to oppose you. We share common enemies and common goals. Our peoples are strong standing apart. Together they would be a force to shake galaxies. Like your race, ours has fought countless wars, wars that have made us strong. A combined army under your leadership could one day drive your enemies before you. The chance to forge a permanent alliance that could renew your empire, not just another costly conquest, stands before you. It is an opportunity that should not easily be turned aside. We are willing to take that leap of faith. The question is, do you have that same courage? For a long while the two groups stood and talked. At one point, the lead Deimos raised a long, slender finger and pointed to the nearest Red, the man appearing as if he would melt before the gesture. Slowly but surely, however, Stalker noticed a change. Both groups became more comfortable, even relaxed, Stalker swearing that he saw a Deimos laugh at something relayed to him by the Red Legion translator. Stalker had been watching them intently for what seemed like hours when the spell that held him was suddenly broken, as the group began to stroll casually, heading straight towards the settlement. Stalker's mind clicked over into high gear as he quickly assessed the situation. Out wider of the strolling group, more Deimos guards also were moving. The procession moved casually, talking as they came. Stalker decided to stay put, lying flat on the floor, knowing that unless they entered the building there was little or no chance of him being seen. For a few minutes all Stalker could hear was the sound of his own heart beating. Then he began to hear voices, vague on the breeze at first before becoming clearer. Stalker realized the group was going to pass right beneath his second-story window, the human voices sounding strange between the deep tones of the Deimos. Yes, my lord, we fully understand your concerns. We know that we will have to earn your trust, but we are certain that once you see how much we can be of service that your doubts will disappear. Most certainly, my lord. Earth is where we can aid your campaign the most. We have a great many loyal servants there who are well-placed. Certainly, if you give us time to contact those in the military, we can give you an accurate picture of the defenses that the heretics have built up around the planet. Stalker heard his knuckles crack as his hands closed in a fist in response to his muted fury. Stalker's hand touched one of the grenades he was carrying, but he dismissed the idea. The information was more important than his desire to kill the group. Instead, Stalker swore himself an oath. Those who had betrayed Earth would die. All of them. Every last traitor. Even if the price was his own life, he would see it done. Within 30 days is very possible, my lord. That will allow us to get word to all of our people and to verify their information. The heretics have tight security, but we will get you whatever you require, no matter the cost. Empires are forged in blood. Would you not agree? The voices began to become inaudible as they moved further away, and Stalker let his breath out in a slow, controlled trickle, stemming his own outrage as much as the flow of air from between his lips. Stalker waited a few minutes to be certain the group were gone before cautiously peering out the window. The group had moved through the settlement and out of sight, only a few Deimos guards being still visible as they brought up the rear guard. Stalker rolled back onto the floor and thought for a moment. Unless they were bluffing, the Red Legion were far stronger and better placed than anyone on Earth realized. He had to get the information into the hands of people he could trust. That meant getting off Ross Optima and back to the Terra Nova. Without needing to look, Stalker recalled where the red transport ships were. The transports were in open ground and heavily guarded with no obvious cover that could be used to get close. Nevertheless, they were too good an opportunity to pass up, and Stalker knew that they could very well be his only opportunity to get off the planet. If they left without him on board, the only other chance was to hope that somewhere with walking distance, a shuttle or transport had been left behind in working order at another settlement. Stalker had always known that the chances of that were slim. Equally as slim was the chance of getting his hands on a Deimos ship, assuming, of course, that he could even figure out how to make it fly. Like all Terra Nova, Stalker had undergone basic pilot training, enough to get him by on a familiar type, but certainly not enough to realistically hope to fly an alien craft. Stalker racked his brain for a way to get on board and escape on one of the red transports, but every idea he came up with had the same problem. They ultimately ended in his death. Rushing the Deimos heavy weapon crews was suicide. Even if he managed to take them, one shout or shot fired would bring Deimos running from the nearby ship. Even if he managed to shoot his way through the Deimos and by some miracle reach one of the transports, he then would have to deal with the Red Legion crew, Deimos fighters prowling overhead, and a Deimos fleet in orbit around the planet. Direct confrontation, the loud method, would never work. As he mulled the problem, Stalker recalled what an instructor had once told him. If you lack strength, use guile. The only quiet option was to try to sneak aboard one of the transports and to take control of it after it was clear of the Deimos. This too had myriads of potential problems, the most obvious being that any attempt would have to wait for dark, and there was no way of knowing when the transports planned to leave. Stalker decided he would have to deal with that eventuality if or when it occurred, and instead focused on working out how to reach the transports without being seen by the Deimos roving patrols and heavy weapons teams. An idea, so simple he almost dismissed it, began to form in his mind. A diversion. The enemy can't see you if they are looking the other way. Atlas reached up and massaged his temples, his efforts being rewarded by a slight diminishing of the dull ache reverberating inside his skull. He felt like he had not slept in days. All of his seemingly limitless strength, both mental and physical, drained away. The negotiations, despite being protracted, had gone well, indeed better than expected. Treaty conditions had been drawn up and a memorandum of understanding agreed to by the contracting parties. Atlas smiled vacantly at the thought that such legal niceties held sway even between cultures that remained fundamentally different, not to mention at war. Atlas didn't care about the treaty or the betrayal of his species' sovereignty that it represented, any more than he cared for the Red Legion. The treaty was just another variable in maintaining the balance of war and chaos, the two elements which created the conditions in which he excelled. Atlas yawned, the strength of the reflex catching him by surprise. The treaty remained unsigned, but that was not unexpected. The Deimos would want to see the Red Legion deliver on their end of the bargain before they put ink to paper and made the treaty official. Reaching for a glass of water, Atlas took a sip the tepid water feeling coarse as it ran down his throat. Many hours of speaking the alien Deimos tongue had left him on the verge of voicelessness, and he had struggled towards the end as his tortured vocal cords has begun to falter. Atlas sighed and downed the remainder of the water with the sleeping pill he had procured from the shuttle's medical kit. They would be leaving in a few hours, and his job was complete. The sun began to set, seeming to turn a deeper red as it descended. Reddish-orange light bathed everything, including to Stalker's relief both of the Red Legion transports, which remained motionless in the clearing. Stalker had spent the rest of the day fine-tuning his plan of action and keeping a close eye on the Deimos and Reds. As the last of the light faded, Stalker slipped silently from the building and headed for the outer edge of the settlement. There, Stalker soon found what he was looking for, a large boulder on a slope above the settlement. Stalker looked up at the boulder. It must have weighed several tons. That will do perfectly. Stalker dug a hole at the boulder's base and unclipped a C6 charge, set the yield to a carefully judged 35%, and placed it in the hole. After taking the remote detonator from the disc-shaped explosive, he backfilled the hole. It then took Stalker several tense minutes to work his way into a position where he was as close to the transports as he could get, and at an angle where the noise would draw all eyes away from him. Stalker looked all around. Everything seemed quiet, and nothing unusual drew his attention. He took a deep breath and pressed the button on the remote detonator. There was a dullish thump, followed by a sound like distant thunder, a rumble that grew in crescendo. Deep, throaty calls rung out in the darkness. Stalker waited. He had to judge it just right. The noise increased still further, and in the darkness to his left, Stalker could see lanky figures moving. Stalker took a deep breath, and keeping as low as possible headed into open ground, the transport he was making for seeming incredibly far away. Stalker had never felt so vulnerable. The rolling rumble ended in a spectacular crash, and the cool night air was pierced with a cacophony of sounds. Stalker, realizing the boulder, had rolled into a building. Then there was a sudden decrease in noise following the boulder's finale, and to Stalker his footsteps suddenly sounded like thunderclaps in the darkness. Throwing caution to the wind, he sprinted the last few meters and hit the ground at the transport's base like a baseball player sliding on a home base. Stalker's heart was racing, and he brought his ASBR up and scanned the darkness, ready to face the hail of fire and Deimos that he knew must be coming. But they never came. The night remained filled with a gaunt quiet. For several moments, Stalker dared not move. Then he began to slowly crawl deeper under the transport, and after a tense few minutes feeling in the darkness, found what he was looking for. Stalker pulled out the safety pins and tried the release handle for the belly maintenance hatch. Mercifully, the handle moved with a click. Willing it to be silent, Stalker slowly increased pressure on the handle, which moved in halting jolts, creaking alarmingly. With a slight rush of warm air, the hatch came open. Dim light poured from it, and Stalker used his body to block it as he scrambled inside, closing the hatch behind him. Stalker found himself in a lateral service conduit filled with pipes and electrical cables, the tight space only being just big enough to accommodate his bulky EA. Above his head, Stalker saw a vertical access hatch that he guessed would likely lead into one of the transport's 2 cargo bays. Rows of hand grips beckoned him upwards, and despite the mortal danger he was still in, Stalker broke into smile. The big bad wolf has entered the sheep pen. It was a few hours later that Stalker heard the transport's engines fire up, a distinctive high-pitched whine, and he knew that his chance was approaching. With a jolt, the transport lifted off. Stalker waited for a moment to be sure that it wasn't just moving a short distance, then began to climb up the conduit to the access hatch. Stalker lifted the hatch slowly, his pistol held in his free hand, but to his relief, nothing moved in the cargo bay and no voices could be heard. Stalker popped the hatch and clambered out, keeping his pistol ready. But there proved nothing more threatening to be found in the hold than the possibility of motion sickness caused by the pitching motion of the transport as it climbed. Cautiously, Stalker passed through the threshold from the rear cargo hold to the forward hold, but still the transport seemed deserted. Stalker touched the side of the hold, and even through the glove of his EEA suit, He could feel the icy cold coming through the alloy hull. They were in space. Stalker had been about to move towards the crew compartment to gain access to the bridge when the hatch suddenly swung open. A man dressed in red SBA came through. By chance, he was looking to the left and didn't notice the frozen Stalker to his immediate right. As he stepped through the doorway, Stalker drew his combat knife and in a smooth movement plunged it into the man's throat and at the same time clapped a hand over the man's mouth. With a grunt, Stalker ripped the knife clear through the Red's throat, severing the windpipe and sending blood spraying. The Red's eyes went wide and a muffled groan escaped from under Stalker's hand as he began to struggle. But his life's blood was already spilling onto the decking of the cargo hold, and the man's strength quickly faded, terror and confusion showing in his eyes, even as the light went out of them. Stalker quickly dragged the body behind a crate, just as another bemused-looking Red came through the door. The man looked down at the blood-soaked floor and then up at Stalker, his mouth falling open. Stalker lunged at him and plunged his already bloody knife into the man's chest. A cry escaped the Red's lips before Stalker brought a hand up and smashed it into his face, instantly cutting the cry short. Stalker twisted the blade to release the suction and, reversing his grip, slammed the knife upwards under the Red's chin, the blade reaching up into his brain, killing him instantly. "What the fuck's going on back there?" Stalker let the body drop. "I fell arse up. Can't you keep this thing steady?" There was a guffaw from somewhere up ahead. "Toughen up, princess." Stalker crept forward and peered into the cockpit. There were two pilots sitting alongside one another. Both were busy with the flight controls, one flying while the other was programming the navigational computer. They seemed to be in open space. The other Red transport was visible up ahead, and Stalker guessed that they were getting ready to jump out of the system. Stalker knew there could be more Reds in the crew quarters, but they could wait. He had to make sure they didn't jump in the wrong direction. Not wanting to risk damaging the controls, Stalker quietly holstered his Z8A pistol and silently drew his sword from its scabbard. With a reverse-bladed thrust, Stalker threw his whole weight behind the long blade and sent it through the back of the nearest pilot's seat. The sword slipped through the seat with surprising ease, and with a spray of blood half of its length, emerged from the pilot's chest. The other pilot reacted fast and went for his sidearm. But with cool calmness, Stalker released the impaled sword and grabbed the pilot's head in a killing grip, twisting it around, the bones of the man's neck snapping with an audible crunch. Stalker unclipped the dead man's harness and heaved the body out of the seat, dropping it unceremoniously to the cockpit floor. Taking his seat, Stalker took the controls with one hand, keeping the transport in formation, and with the other began punching a new destination into the navigation computer. Lotus 1 preparing to jump. "Are you ready, Lotus 2? Stalker hit the comm switch and with his best pilot's voice replied, "All received, Lotus 1. Lotus 2 is standing by." "Roger, Lotus 2. Jump on my mark. 3, 2, 1, mark." The other Red Legion transport disappeared in a bright flash. Stalker ignored it and brought his transport about, and after quickly verifying the coordinates, jumped towards Proxima Centauri, hoping against hope that the UEDF still held the system. With the autopilot locked, and Stalker retrieved his bloodied sword and went to clear the rest of the transport's rooms. The first 3 of the crew bunks were empty, but the last was occupied. Stalker instantly recognized the man in the red robes he had seen earlier. He was peacefully sleeping in the bunk. Stalker had to restrain himself from throttling the man in his sleep, and instead gently shook him awake. The Red stirred groggily. "Have we arrived at the rendezvous yet?" The man's eyes widened as he saw the blood-specked black skull-faced figure looming over him. He started to mumble something, but Stalker slammed his fist into his jaw, knocking him out cold. Stalker spent the following hours in nervous waiting before dropping out of faster-than-light speed, as close to the system as he dared, not wanting to risk a collision with any ships in the area. Stalker didn't immediately see any ships, just the distant star of Proxima Centauri and the closer shape of the system's only planet, Proxima Externus. "Mayday, Mayday. This is Alpha 2-1 to any United Earth Fleet vessel or a United Earth Defense Force unit. Is anyone receiving me? I say again, this is Alpha 2-1. I am declaring an emergency and require assistance. Is anyone out there over? Anxious moments passed in silence, and Stalker was just about to try again when a voice crackled over the comm. Alpha 2-1. This is Omicron System Command. We have you on our scope. Transmit system code clearance. It's good to hear your voice, Omicron. I don't have system code clearance. Verify Iden Alpha 2-1 Rubicon 7-4. I have valuable cargo on board and request immediate escort over. All received 2-1. Hold position while we verify your ident. Look for angels at 05. Stalker felt a weight lift of his shoulders. Friendly forces were coming and were 5 minutes away. Stalker looked at the cockpit around him. 2 bodies lay on the floor in a pool of congealed blood. On top of them was a bound and gagged Red, his face bruised, his eyes wide and wild. In just under 5 minutes, Stalker heard voice over the comm. Alpha 2-1, this is Vermilion Leader over. I hear you loud and clear, Vermilion. Go ahead. 2-1, you are to form up on my wing and follow me in. If you deviate, you will be destroyed. Do you understand? All received, Vermilion. Although I don't see you, in a minute 2-1 you will. Stalker looked around intently, but saw nothing. He was about to reply when he spied something coming up from below. His eyes took a moment to make sense of what he was seeing against the myriad distant stars. Then the image came into sudden sharp focus. Hundreds of Dark Star fighters were rushing up at him. Seeming to come from nowhere, it looked like every fighter in the UEF was out there. Dozens of crisscrossing formations maneuvered with breathtaking skill. Then all at once they blazed past him, like a swarm of highly agitated hornets, just willing the intruder to make a wrong move so they could sting. Stalker just watched in amazement. Suddenly he no longer felt alone. He felt confidence surge in his heart. At last he was home. A fighter pulled close alongside, and Stalker could see the pilot returning his scrutiny. Then, apparently satisfied, the fighter pulled ahead and waggled its wings as a signal to follow. As he followed the fighter, Stalker got a good view of the distant red dwarf star Proxima Centauri. The system was the nearest to Earth, at a mere 4.3 million light-years distant. Its star was small and dim, only about 1/7 the size of the Earth's sun, and cast a weak reddish light, not unlike that of Ross 154. Before long, Stalker could begin to make out the shape of dozens of ships in orbit around the planet of Proxima Externus, the ships resembling a gray asteroid belt in the dim light. The planet of Proxima Externus, literally meaning next to outer, was another rocky planet and was comparable to Earth in size. The planet lacked water, but had proven to have a good mixture of gases for terraforming, and as a result, many of the first terraforming experiments had been conducted there. There were several valuable minerals present within the rocky surface, but by and large the planet had been bypassed for large-scale colonization for more water-rich planets. Instead, vast areas had been turned over to the UEDF as training areas, the UEF using the planet to conduct tests with its heaviest weapons and to see the results of orbital weapons fire, while the UEA tested new explosive compounds in the rocky wastes. The surface of the planet was barely lit by Proxima Centauri, and as a result, surface temperatures remained relatively low. This also left the surface in perpetual twilight, although Proxima Centauri was prone to regular flares which temporarily brightened the gloomy landscape. Stalker followed the leading dark star as they closed on the massive silhouette of a Unity-class battleship. As they passed under the ship, Stalker could see its close and defensive turrets tracking his shuttle, their barrels following the transport as it passed. No one was taking any chances with the strange arrival. 2-1, this is Vermilion Leader. Vermilion, this is 2-1. Send. Proceed to the landing bay directly ahead. Once aboard, immediately exit your ship. Do not deviate from these instructions, or we will use deadly force. Stalker acknowledged and steered the transport into the yawning mouth of the battleship's landing bay, the dark star peeling off at the last moment. As he touched down, Stalker was surprised to see a mecha standing in the landing bay, the dangerous-looking armored behemoth mirroring his movements as he landed. Stalker recognized it as a whirlwind pattern anti-infantry mech with its lethal twin multi-barreled cannons, Hellstrike missiles, and area effect high explosive fragmentation, or HEF, rockets. Once the bay doors closed, and the pressure equalized. Dozens of Marines poured out from access doors and quickly surrounded the motionless transport. Well, these guys aren't fucking around, Stalker thought as he eyed the waiting Marines. Several of the Marines held single launch armor-piercing, or SLAP, launchers at the ready, the heat warheads more than capable of shattering the unarmored transport. Stalker quickly made sure the captured Red was incapacitated, dropped all of his weapons on the floor, and without further ado, walked down the transport side access ramp. A Marine officer bearing Colonel's epaulets walked forward to meet him. The Marine officer stopped in front of him and looked Stalker up and down. "Take your helmet off." Stalker let the useless EEA helmet fall to the ground. "Son, you look like shit." Stalker looked down at himself. His armor was cracked and ruined, and was caked with the dried blood of the men he had killed, now combined with the dirt and grime acquired from days spent in the wilderness. "I have to agree, Colonel. I have looked better." "Well, son, your looks are the least of your problems." "How's that?" "According to your service file, you're dead." "Well, I can't say I agree with that assessment, Colonel." The Colonel looked him up and down again. "Well, son, until we do a DNA typing on you, you're not going anywhere, especially after flying that thing on board." Stalker followed the Colonel's stern expression to the transport behind him, the red paint and Red Legion glyph staring back at him. "Well, I do have someone on board who can explain that a lot better than me. You'll find one very unhappy Red tied up on the cockpit floor along with the bodies of 4 of his friends." The Colonel waved a waiting squad of Marines forward, and they cautiously entered the transport, emerging a moment later, dragging the Red, who looked like a turkey trussed up for a Christmas dinner. A Marine medic stepped up to Stalker and put a DNA typing device to his neck, Stalker feeling the prick as it took a sample. The medic plugged the device into a handheld computer. Stalker looked around. A wall of Marines were watching him closely through their rifle sights. After a moment, there was a beep. The medic nodded to the Colonel, who relaxed. "Well, Specialist, it appears you are who you claim to be." He glanced at the captured Red. "What's his story?" He was the translator for a high-level meeting between the Red Legion and the Deimos. The Colonel looked Stalker in the eye for a long moment, and then waved forward a Marine lieutenant. "Get the commanding admiral on the line. We have got something down here he needs to see." As Atlas was dragged out of the shuttle, his keenly honed survival instincts began to kick in, his mind rapidly clearing as adrenaline surged into his system. His initial shock was soon replaced by a burning feeling of shame that he had let his guard fall and been subdued so easily. Anger coming close on the heels of shame. Consciously, he made his body relax. Fighting against his bonds would achieve nothing more than wasting precious energy. He began instead to focus on his surroundings. He instantly recognized the sterile gray, orderly hangar bay of a UEF warship, although there were no indications of what fleet it was a part of or what system they were in. Atlas turned his attention to the men around him. Most were Marines, including an officer with colonel's insignia, but one stood out in black. Atlas felt his anger turn to burning rage as the man who had captured him so easily turned and looked in his direction. Even without the distinctive black EEA of a member of the Terra Nova Assault Division, which every schoolboy on Earth would recognize, the man's stance and easy confidence set him apart as an elite soldier. Atlas marked every detail of the face, committing them to memory. He did not recognize the man, but he would find out who he was, then he would kill him. Atlas spat on the ground to clear his mouth of blood and phlegm, receiving a rifle, but to the back of the head in response. Almost at once he began to move, being unceremoniously dragged from the hangar bay, the warrior in black watching all the way. After Stalker spent several hours in intensive debriefs, he was finally allowed to catch a few hours' sleep. Between debriefing sessions, Stalker had been able to find out the current situation. A lot had happened since the battle at Ross 154. Earth was rapidly arming. The news of the alien attack had spread like wildfire, but with a few exceptions, events of civil disorder remained low. New divisions were being raised almost daily as the populace reacted to the outbreak of war with a mixture of patriotism and xenophobia. Helping train these divisions were the veterans of the Praetorian Assault Division who had remained on Earth, ready to fall on any ground incursion with a vengeance. The combined industry of Earth had also been turned to war production, with new weapons and vehicles of every type being produced at breakneck speed. In the space surrounding Earth, the largest fleet ever assembled had been formed around the first fleet based at UEF Lunar, all other fleets having been stripped of units to reinforce the home defense. In the outlying systems surrounding Earth, the battered remnants of Earth's other fleets were desperately trying to hold their ground and give Earth time to prepare for the inevitable assault, forcing the enemy to pay for every foot of space they took, bleeding themselves white in the process. The 4th and 7th fleets, including the Philistines and Rangers, had been pushed back with heavy losses to LHS 288 and were barely holding their ground. The 5th and 9th fleets, with the Barbarians and Vikings, had fared better and had fought a skillful fighting retreat to the dual-star system of Kruger 60A and B before stopping the enemy advance cold. The 2nd and 10th fleets, with the Excalibur Division and the Raptors, were holding another dual-star system, Groom Bridge 34A and B, but were slowly losing their foothold in the system despite bitter fighting. The 2nd Fleet, along with the Crusaders, was still missing in action, last being reported in heavy fighting in the systems around Ursa Majoris. Despite the dire news, what concerned Stalker the most was what was occurring on Proxima Externus, even now, as he tried to sleep. The remnants of the 3rd Fleet, now combined with the 6th, had regained tenuous control of the space around the planet after a series of costly engagements. Despite the UEF's best efforts, the Deimos had managed to land large numbers of ground forces. The planet itself had little real value other than its strategic importance as a stepping stone to Earth, but the decision had been made to make a stand and hold the system as long as possible. The Terra Nova, including D and the 2nd Regiment, reinforced by the Immortals, had deployed to the surface to give battle and was now holding a thin line before continuing furious Deimos ground and air assaults. Stalker chafed knowing that the Terra Nova was in action, that his company, his friends, and his men were in action, and he wasn't there with them. Stalker reconciled himself with the knowledge that the past several hours since his return from the dead had not been wasted time. He had made certain that the information and the prisoner he had acquired had been taken seriously and had gotten to the right people. That was now out of his hands. As soon as possible, he would be catching a lift on a resupply run to rejoin the Terra Nova. For Stalker, the hours couldn't pass fast enough. "We will have your name soon. Why don't you make it easy on yourself? Tell me your name. Do you have any family that you want to get a message to? It could be arranged." Atlas had to stop himself from laughing at the amateur interrogation he was undergoing. Instead, he satisfied himself with rolling his eyes, the small action causing a slight flush to creep up the neck of the interrogating officer. The man was a Marine captain who, apparently as part of his role as head of ship security, had taken courses in interrogation and was keen to put the theory into practice. Having prisoners on board a warship was rare, with space combat rarely leaving any survivors, and Atlas represented an opportunity for the officer to hone his skills. Atlas would happily have given the officer a few tips from his own extensive experience, but decided against it. His only advantage was that his captors did not yet know who he was, otherwise he would be surrounded by dozens of armed guards. His interrogator had been upset when the ongoing long-distance communications jamming had prevented the DNA typing test data from being sent to fleet headquarters at UEF Lunar for identification. His theory having told him that having a name was key to building trust between the interrogator and interrogated. It was only a matter of time, however, before the signal got through. The test results would trigger the intelligence branch's high-value target alert system, and his identity and location would become known to his tireless hunters. His UEDF captors would not kill him, but Atlas was under no illusions as to what would happen once a member of the intelligence branch reached him. He would be unceremoniously shot in the head. Atlas did not blame them. He would have done the same thing. Some enemies were too dangerous to be left alive or risk transporting back to Earth. He was on borrowed time, and it was running out. As the door burst open, General Jacob de Veers glanced up, his interest increasing as he saw the flushed face of the man who had disturbed him. "We have him, sir." "Where?" "He is being held on board the Glory in the Proxima Centauri system." "Notify Fleet Command. Tell them they have a high-priority target in custody and to take all possible precautions. Already done, sir, but heavy jamming is hampering long-range communications. Good. And Pierce, inform our people in the system. You know what needs to be done. Yes, sir, I know what to do. It had taken time, but Atlas has slowly increased his captor's frustration to boiling point. A look at the right time, sarcasm combined with details of real and imagined crimes against the UEL, and tales of murdering UEDF personnel, all combining to provide the desired effect. The first blow coming so unexpectedly and explosively that Atlas was caught almost unprepared, only just managing to roll his head to lessen the impact. He let the officer strike him 3 more times before he slumped off his seat on the ground. As he had anticipated, the enraged officer refused to sully his honor by aiding a traitor and instead ordered the other 2 occupants of the room, 2 Marine guards, to pick him up. As they heave him up off the floor, Atlas seized his chance. If the Marines had realized the latent lethality of the man whom they were assisting, they would have had more guards in the room and a gun held firmly to the back of his head. As he was dragged to his feet, Atlas bit down hard twice on a carefully crafted false tooth. Soundlessly, the small device concealed in the tooth released a pressurized burst of a lethal, colorless, odorless gas into the exposed faces of the 2 guards. The 2 Marines dying before they realized what had happened as the corrosive poison entered their bodies on contact with the skin. As they fell, Atlas pretended to fight, throwing the bodies to the floor. Just as he knew he would, the Marine captain rushed to help his men with the apparently struggling prisoner, running straight into the invisible, rapidly expanding cloud of poison, managing only a choked cry before he collapsed. As Atlas took the access card for his restraints off the dead captain and freed his hands and feet, he glanced over the bodies. The compound's lethality was impressive, and he was grateful that he had been inoculated against its effects. He would have no lasting impacts from his exposure, but in the short term he would lose his voice, his throat already beginning to burn. The 3 Marines had died fast with little noise, but due to the interrogation rooms soundproofing, the odds of anyone outside overhearing was unlikely. Acting quickly, Atlas changed into a mix of clothes and equipment taken from the Marines, keeping the captain's rank, but taking the guards' tactical equipment, including an IW-30C rifle and sidearm. Atlas took a deep breath, a thin smile crossing his face as he contemplated his situation. He was on board a UEDF warship surrounded by people who wanted him dead, and to compound his problems, his DNA had been typed, which would soon result in a kill-on-sight order being issued. Atlas drew his stolen sidearm and flexed his stiff muscles. Now the fun begins. Atlas threw open the door. "Get in here quick! There's been some trouble." A Marine guard rushed in, his rifle up and ready. As he passed, Atlas quickly slammed the heavy door closed and shot him in the back of the head. Atlas almost laughed aloud at the ease with which he had killed the man. Human psychology was all too easy to manipulate when you put the mind under unexpected pressure. The guard, in his rush to respond, had never noticed the different clothing or voice of the officer who had called him into the room. He had only seen a Marine uniform, and his mind had translated this to mean that the person wearing it was an ally. It was a subconscious association that was all too easily manipulated. Atlas slipped out of the room and headed for the one place he could escape the ship, one of the ship's hangar bays. As he moved, no one seemed to notice his non-regulation mix of clothing. A few Marine privates glancing his way, but losing interest when they saw the captain's rank insignia. The first hangar Atlas reached did not contain any shuttles, so he doubled across to the portside hangar. This one, too, was empty, containing only a small number of Marine fighters. Atlas knew he was running out of time. His absence would soon be noticed. He was about to leave when a siren and flashing warning lights sounded across the hangar, an announcement notifying the deck crew that a shuttle was coming in. Atlas made a snap decision and decided to risk waiting to see if the new arrival would suit his purpose. After what felt like an age, the hangar was cleared and the outer doors opened. Into the hangar swept a sleek-looking shuttle, Atlas instantly recognizing it as a type capable of inter-system travel. As the shuttle touched down, the hangar's immense outer doors snapped closed. As soon as the hangar pressurized the shuttle's rear, hatch opened, and a group of 12 heavily armed soldiers rushed across the hangar. Atlas instantly recognized them as Pathfinders, and they were in a hurry. "I wonder who you are here for," Atlas said lightly to himself, and moved to intercept the group. As he moved, Atlas spied a number of Marines completing various tasks in adjacent rooms. All were armed. Atlas paused as the Pathfinder team came bursting out of an intersecting corridor and passed him at a dead run, none of them paying any attention to the Marine officer who moved out of their way. As the last passed, Atlas snapped up his IW-30C and opened fire on full automatic, the noise deafening in the confined space of the passageway. The passageway erupted in chaos, the cold metal floor becoming instantly thick with blood and broken bodies. Snatching up a fallen ASBR-103, Atlas poured more fire into the disorganized Pathfinders before hurriedly falling back, returned fire from the surviving Pathfinders beginning to spray the passageway. Diving clear into the adjacent corridor, Atlas saw more than a dozen Marines and sailors running his way. Atlas fired a quick burst down the passageway, bursts of blue impulse fire answering. As the onrushing Marines and sailors reached him, Atlas mustered his best severe Marine officer's voice. "We've been boarded. Red Legion infiltrators wearing heavy armor. They must have come in on that last shuttle. You men hold them here. I need to contact the CEO and let him know the situation." Not waiting for a response, Atlas dragged himself to his feet and ran back towards the hangar, the sound of gunfire echoing behind. As he reached the hangar, he ran for the docking controls. As he reached them, he shot dead the console operator as the man rose to ask him what was going on. The ship's general alarm had now activated and shouts could be heard echoing from nearby, while further away the sound of intense gunfire continued to rage. Atlas's hands flew across the console, and having set the hangars to open on a time delay of 1 minute, he ran for the waiting shuttle. As he ran through the alarms and flashing lights, another smile crossed Atlas Heardon's face. He had come, and chaos had followed in his footsteps. Stalker rolled out of the cozy bunk he had been occupying, giving up his attempt at sleep, and instead headed to the ship's main armory. He had dropped his EEA suit and weapons to be cleaned up and hopefully restored to something resembling workable order several hours before, as there hadn't been the time to get a new one fitted from the Terra Nova stocks. The head armorer had attended to it personally, and Stalker found that his weapons had been stripped, cleaned, and tested, while the EEA had its damaged composite plates replaced and its ruined power unit had been changed out for a new one. The suit still looked scuffed and dirty, but the armorer assured him that all its systems had checked out okay. Fully kitted up, including a freshly cleaned sword, Stalker headed back to command level and took a stroll along the deck to kill some time. On his third lap, Stalker's brooding was interrupted. "Hello, Specialist." Stalker turned in surprise and saw a striking-looking woman in a UEF commander's uniform. She was almost as tall as Stalker, and even through her crisp uniform, Stalker could see she was athletic. Her shoulder-length auburn hair hung lightly. Her hands were on her hips, and her expression betrayed a hint of bemusement. Her most striking feature was her eyes. They were a brilliant green, and right now they were locked on him. "You don't recognize me, do you, Specialist?" Stalker searched his memory for a moment. Something was very familiar about her, but he couldn't quite pinpoint it. Stalker's stomach did a sudden churn at the thought that she might be some long-forgotten lover. She let the moment hang uncomfortably for a few seconds, seeming to enjoy his discomfort before laughing lightly. "Well, I recognize you. Your brooding stance and serious expression are unmistakable. Still, I thought that you would recognize the damsels in distress that you save." A light went on in Stalker's brain, the recognition obviously showing in his face as Janet Combs laughed again. "That's right, soldier boy, and before you call me ma'am, the name is Janet." Stalker stepped forward and started to offer her his hand. Janet, however, stepped lightly around it, and to his surprise, gave him a hug. "It's nice to see you again, Battle Commander. I didn't think you saw me. You were sedated by the time we organized your evac from Pavonis Prime." "Sedated or not, I recognize you." She looked around. "Where's that handsome deputy commander of yours?" Stalker didn't quite know how to reply. To be honest, after our retreat from Ross 154, I don't know. Stalker saw a real, concerned blossom in her face. Don't worry, Miss Combs. It's just Janet. Okay, Janet, don't worry. Link has made out of tight spots before. I'm sure he's down there on the surface. She seemed to accept his verdict. Well, you tell him that Janet asked after him, and that if he doesn't put a call through to me at the first possible opportunity that I will be most unimpressed. You tell him that. Stalker spent the rest of the next hour talking to Janet. He discovered that after the loss of the Cerberus, she had been removed from the active list, pending an inquiry into the loss of the ship. It was standard protocol after any UEF ship was lost, but due to the outbreak of war, the inquiry had been postponed indefinitely, effectively leaving her in limbo. She had been extensively debriefed about the events by the intelligence branch and cleared of any guilt, yet no one seemed willing or able to give her an assignment. So, she spent her time between the two fleets helping out where she could, waiting for the slow wheels of bureaucracy to turn. Stalker felt sorry for her. She was an incredibly strong woman, but he could see that it was slowly wearing her down. She had lost her ship and shipmates, and now just wanted to get back in the saddle. Stalker made a mental note to take the matter higher when he could. It was an injustice to see her virtually being treated as a pariah after all she had gone through. As the hour of his departure approached, Stalker bid Janet goodbye and headed for the main hangar bay. It was time to get back in the war, and he reminded himself he also had a message to deliver. General de Veers read quickly but carefully, every detail of the report being committed to memory. His expression remained stonily neutral, but a trained eye would have recognized subtle signs of frustration, a slight flush, and the minute twitch of a nerve. The report was a litany of disaster. Once again, a chance to a threat to the UEL had ended in wasted life and wasted opportunity. After a few minutes, de Veers finished and sat back. After a moment's silence, de Veers glanced sideways at the silent figure sitting in the corner of the room. So, Pierce, once again the foxes outfoxed the hunters, another opportunity lost. Lazarus, he calls himself, a man who came back to life. Appropriate considering how many times he has cheated death. I hadn't given the name a great deal of thought until now. Perhaps that was a mistake. De Veers stood and, placing his hands behind his back, began to pace. A man who came back to life. That is how he sees himself. Someone who has risen again. Someone with no destiny, no fate, but what he makes for himself. A man who believes in nothing, cares for nothing. Someone who revels in chaos and disorder. I don't care about his jaded self-motivation, sir. I would settle for where he is now and where his is going. De Veers paused his pacing. This is war. Soldiers die. We have both ordered men and women to their deaths and lived with it. We have also both ended lives by our own hands, some of the blood that is on our hands and will never wash clean. But we are soldiers, sir. We don't always wear uniforms or fight with what some might call honor, but we serve a cause greater than ourselves, and we don't murder the innocent. De Veers noted the strain in Pierce's voice. The truth was it was personal for both of them. One a son who betrayed his father's trust, the second the man who caused the death of one held dear. De Veers sat back down, the weight on his shoulders feeling a little bit heavier. You said you wanted to know where he is going, Pierce? He is going to where that chaos will be like a moth drawn to the flame. He is coming here to Earth.